turn you off merely because you didn't pass the exam?" "I don't know," said Beatrice coldly. "Agatha says you're as good as any teacher anywhere. It seems to me ridiculous. I wonder why you didn't pass." "Short of brains, eh, Postle?" said Beatrice briefly. "Only brains to bite with," replied Paul, laughing. "Nuisance!" she cried, and springing from her seat she rushed and boxed his ears. She had beautiful small hands. He held her wrists while she wrestled with him. At last she broke free, and seized 2 handfuls of his thick, dark brown hair, which she shook. "Beat!" he said, as he pulled his hair straight with his fingers. "I hate you!" She laughed with glee. "Mind," she said, "I want to sit next to you." "I'd as lief be neighbours with a vixen," he said, nevertheless making place for her between him and Miriam. "Did it ruffle his pretty hair, then?" she cried, and with her hair-comb she combed him straight. "And his nice little moustache!" she exclaimed. She tilted his head back and combed his young moustache. "It's a wicked moustache, Postle," she said. "It's a red for danger. Have you got any of those cigarettes?" He pulled his cigarette case from his pocket. Beatrice looked inside it. "And fancy me having Connie's last cig," said Beatrice, putting the thing between her teeth. He held a lit match to her, and she puffed daintily. "Thanks so much, darling," she said mockingly. It gave her a wicked delight. "Don't you think he does it nicely, Miriam?" she asked. "Oh, very," said Miriam. He took a cigarette for himself. "Light, old boy?" said Beatrice, tilting her cigarette at him. He bent forward to her to light his cigarette at hers. She was winking at him as he did so. Miriam saw his eyes trembling with mischief, and his full, almost sensual mouth quivering. He was not himself, and she could not bear it. As he was now, she had no connection with him. She might as well have not existed. She saw the cigarette dancing on his full, red lips. She hated his thick hair for being tumbled loose on his forehead. "Sweet boy!" said Beatrice, tipping up his chin and giving him a little kiss on the cheek. "I shall kiss thee back, Beat," he said. "Thou wouldna?" she giggled, jumping up and going away. "Isn't he shameless, Miriam?" "Quite," said Miriam. "By the way, aren't you forgetting the bread?" "By Jove!" he cried, flinging open the oven door. Out puffed the bluish smoke and a smell of burned bread. "Oh, golly!" cried Beatrice, coming to his side. She crouched before the oven. She peered over his shoulder. "This is what comes of the oblivion of love, my boy." Paul was ruefully removing the loaves. One was burnt black on the hot side, another was hard as a brick. "Poor mater," said Paul. "You want to grate it," said Beatrice. "Fetch me the nutmeg grater." She arranged the bread in the oven. He brought the grater, and she grated the bread onto a newspaper on the table. He set the doors open to blow away the smell of burned bread. Beatrice grated away, puffing her cigarette, knocking the charcoal off the poor loaf. "My word, Miriam, you're in for it this time," said Beatrice. "I?" exclaimed Miriam in amazement. "You'd better be gone when his mother comes in. I know why King Alfred burned the cakes. Now I see it. Postle would fix up a tale about his work making him forget, if he thought it would wash. If that old woman had come in a bit sooner, she'd have boxed the brazen thing's ears who made the oblivion, instead of poor Alfred's." She giggled as she scraped the loaf. Even Miriam laughed in spite of herself. Paul mended the fire ruefully. The garden gate was heard to bang. "Quick!" cried Beatrice, giving Paul the scraped loaf. "Wrap it up in a damp towel." Paul disappeared into the scullery. Beatrice hastily blew her scrapings into the fire, and sat down innocently. Annie came bursting in. She was an abrupt, quite smart young woman. She blinked in the strong light. "Smell of burning!" she exclaimed. "It's the cigarettes," replied Beatrice demurely. "Where's Paul?" Leonard had followed Annie. He had a long comic face and blue eyes, very sad. "I suppose he's left you to settle it between you," he said. He nodded sympathetically to Miriam and became gently sarcastic to Beatrice. "No," said Beatrice, "he's gone off with number 9. "I just met number 5 inquiring for him," said Leonard. "Yes, we're going to share him up like Solomon's baby," said Beatrice. Annie laughed. "Oh, I," said Leonard. "And which bit should you have?" "I don't know," said Beatrice. "I'll let all the others pick first." "And you'd have the leavings, like?" said Leonard, twisting up a comic face. Annie was looking in the oven. Miriam sat ignored. Paul entered. "This bread's a fine sight, our Paul," said Annie. "Then you should stop and look after it," said Paul. "You mean you should do what you're reckoning to do," replied Annie. "He should, shouldn't he?" cried Beatrice. "I should think he'd got plenty on hand," said Leonard. "You had a nasty walk, didn't you, Miriam?" said Annie. "Yes, but I'd been in all week." "And you wanted a bit of a change, like," insinuated Leonard kindly. "Well, you can't be stuck in the house for ever," Annie agreed. She was quite amiable. Beatrice pulled on her coat and went out with Leonard and Annie. She would meet her own boy. "Don't forget that bread, our Paul," cried Annie. "Good night, Miriam. I don't think it will rain." When they had all gone, Paul fetched the swathed loaf, unwrapped it, and surveyed it sadly. "It's a mess," he said. "But," answered Miriam impatiently, "what is it after all? Tuppence ha'penny?" "Yes, but it's the mater's precious baking, and she'll take it to heart. However, it's no good bothering." He took the loaf back into the scullery. There was a little distance between him and Miriam. He stood balanced opposite her for some moments considering, thinking of his behaviour with Beatrice. He felt guilty inside himself, and yet glad. For some inscrutable reason it served Miriam right. He was not going to repent. She wondered what he was thinking of as he stood suspended. His thick hair was tumbling over his forehead. Why might she not push it back for him, and remove the marks of Beatrice's comb? Why might she not press his body with her 2 hands? It looked so firm, and every whit living. And he would let other girls, why not her? Suddenly he started into life. It made her quiver almost with terror as he quickly pushed the hair off his forehead and came towards her. "8:30," he said. "We'd better buck up. Where's your French?" Miriam shyly and rather bitterly produced her exercise book. Every week she wrote for him a sort of diary of her inner life, in her own French. He had found that this was the only way to get her to do compositions, and her diary was mostly a love letter. He would read it now. She felt as if her soul's history were going to be desecrated by him in his present mood. He sat beside her. She watched his hand, firm and warm, rigorously scoring her work. He was reading only the French, ignoring her soul that was there. But gradually his hand forgot its work. He read in silence, motionless. She quivered. "Ce matin les oiseaux m'ont éveillé," he read. "Il faisait encore un crépuscule, mais la petite fenêtre de ma chambre était blême, et puis jaune, et tous les oiseaux du bois éclateront dans une chanson vive et résonnante. Toute l'aube tressaillit. J'avais rêve de vous. Est-ce que vous voyez aussi l'aube? Les oiseaux m'éveillent presque tous les matins, et toujours il y a quelque chose de terreur dans le cri des grives. Il est si clair." Miriam sat tremulous, half ashamed. He remained quite still, trying to understand. He only knew she loved him. He was afraid of her love for him. It was too good for him, and he